My mother called me selfish in front of 22 people on Christmas Eve, and the strangest part was that I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Nothing about the room was funny. My sister's dining table was crowded with half-finished plates, candles burning low in glass holders, and relatives who had suddenly become very interested in their napkins. My mother, Diane Foster, was sitting beneath a framed school picture of my niece with one hand wrapped around a crystal wineglass. She had spent the last 10 minutes telling everyone how difficult it was to grow older when your children were too busy building their little lives to remember who had built theirs first. Then my cousin asked about the house I was trying to buy. My mother smiled at me with that bright, polished expression she used whenever she wanted to hurt me without looking angry. "A house," she said. "Erin can barely manage herself, but I suppose pretending to be independent is easier than actually taking care of the people who need you." There were a few nervous chuckles, not many. Then she looked directly at me and added, "Tell us, sweetheart, how does it feel to choose a mortgage over your own mother?" 48 hours earlier, I had canceled the final automatic payment that had been leaving my bank account every month for almost 7 years. My answer was quiet. "It feels a lot cheaper than paying for your townhouse." My father's fork hit his plate. He stared at me first, then at my mother. "What townhouse?" That question did more damage than anything I could have planned. Because my father knew my mother had a place to live, what he did not know was that I had been paying for it. My sister did not know either. Neither did my aunt, my cousins, or the relatives who had spent years hearing that I was the distant daughter who rarely helped. And I did not know that, when my parents divorced, my father had transferred enough money to my mother that she should never have needed $1 from either of her daughters. I was 35 that Christmas. I had been working overnight shifts as an emergency dispatcher for Henrico County outside Richmond, Virginia, for 11 years. I could keep my voice steady while someone screamed that their husband had collapsed in the driveway. I could pull an address from a panicked child who only knew that the house across the street had a blue mailbox. I could talk a teenager through CPR until paramedics arrived. But put my mother on the phone saying, "I don't know what I'm going to do," and I became 28 again. That was how it started. 7 years earlier, my parents' divorce had been final for about 18 months. I was living in a small apartment above a dry cleaner, and my older sister Rebecca had 2 children under 5, and a marriage held together with shared calendars and caffeine. Our father, Graham Holloway, had moved to a modest brick ranch in Mechanicsville. My mother had taken an apartment in a newer complex near Short Pump and told everyone she was rebuilding. One rainy Tuesday in March, she called me at work. Not during my break, not with a text asking whether I could talk. She called the non-emergency line because my personal phone was in my locker and told the receptionist there was a family crisis. When I called her back, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said the electric company had sent a shut-off notice. She said my father had walked away with his retirement and his freedom and left her with bills she did not know how to manage. She said she had spent the last of her grocery money on a prescription. I sent her $300 before my shift ended. The next month it was her car insurance. Then the copay on dental work. Then groceries. By the end of that year, I had created an automatic transfer for $500 on the 3rd of every month. I told myself it was temporary. 6 months, maybe a year, until she got stable. Temporary things are dangerous when they become routine quietly. The 500 became 700 after she moved to a nicer apartment. Then 900 when she said rent had increased and her part-time income had been cut. 2 years later, she asked me to guarantee a lease on a townhouse in a development called Bellwether Landing. It had walking trails, a pool, a clubhouse with a fireplace, and townhomes with tiny fenced patios. She said it was actually cheaper than renewing her current lease. I believed her. By the 3rd year, helping had become an invisible second household inside my budget. I covered part of her rent, groceries, car insurance, and a rotating list of emergencies: tires, medical bills, repairs, late fees. Whenever I asked to see paperwork, she acted wounded. If helping me has become a burden, just say so. I never did. Instead, I took overtime. The dispatch center always needed someone, and I became easy to schedule because I almost always said yes. Work gave me a respectable explanation for why I was tired, why I never traveled, and why my own plans kept waiting. My apartment was clean and quiet, and nearly empty of anything I did not need. I had one good skillet, 2 sets of sheets, a second-hand couch, and a row of herbs on the kitchen windowsill that kept dying because I forgot to water them after night shifts. My car was a 12-year-old Subaru with a dent over the rear wheel from a grocery cart incident I never fixed. I had one private goal, a small house with a porch. My savings account was literally named Porch, and every time it began to look healthy, some crisis in my mother's life drained it again. The house mattered to me for reasons I did not admit out loud. I had moved 6 times before I was 18 because Mom always believed the next neighborhood would finally feel right. After the divorce, I became obsessed with the idea of one address that would not depend on someone else's mood. I saved paint colors on my phone. I knew which older Richmond neighborhoods had deep lots and which ones flooded after summer storms. I wanted a place where a bad conversation could end at my own front door. Mom knew about Porch. She used to tease me about it. "You and that imaginary house," she would say. Then, whenever a crisis came, she would add, "You have time, you're young." At 35, I had begun to hear the second sentence differently. My future was always the flexible item in our family budget. She had also made secrecy part of the arrangement. From the beginning, she begged me not to tell Dad because she could not bear him knowing she needed help, and not to tell Rebecca because my sister had children and enough stress. I called that protecting her dignity. The result was that nobody knew what I was doing. Rebecca believed Mom rarely asked me for anything because I worked too much. Aunt Valerie described me as distant. I heard more than once that Mom wished I were more involved. I swallowed the irony because correcting it meant revealing the secret. My first real doubt came from Dad in October. He was replacing the battery in my old Subaru when he casually asked whether Mom still lived at Bellwether Landing. I said yes and mentioned she had struggled since the divorce. He looked up from the engine. "Struggled," he said. "I thought she'd be comfortable. We settled things that way." When I asked what he meant, he studied my face, and I panicked. I changed the subject before he could ask why I cared. 3 days later, Mom called with another emergency, $900 for a failed water heater. Because she rented, the story made no sense. I asked for the management invoice. She accused me of treating her like a criminal, then said she was too exhausted to fight the landlord and needed help now. I was 21 hours into being awake. I apologized and sent the money. The following weekend, Aunt Valerie posted a picture in the family group chat from Santa Fe. 4 women sat at a rooftop restaurant beneath a pink desert sky. My mother was in the middle, wearing a new gold watch with a designer leather tote beside her chair. The week before, she had told me she was attending a cheap church retreat outside Charlottesville. Then Valerie sent a second photo from a resort spa. I had worked 16 hours the previous Saturday because Mom needed $900 for a water heater. I spent an hour inventing explanations for her. Maybe Valerie paid. Maybe the watch was fake. Maybe the trip cost almost nothing. Then I went home, opened my own bank history, and added 7 years of transfers, gift cards, insurance payments, and traceable emergencies. The total was $87,460. I checked it 3 times. I had spent years telling myself I was bad at saving for a house when I had actually been maintaining a second adult life. The next morning, Mom texted asking for another $200 because the plumber had found corrosion. For the first time, I replied, "Please send me the invoice." She did not send one. Instead, Aunt Valerie called, and Rebecca texted that Mom said we had fought. Something in my sister's wording made me ask a question I should have asked years earlier. "Has Mom ever borrowed money from you?" Rebecca went quiet. "Sometimes," she said. That evening, Rebecca came to my apartment with her laptop. I showed her my spreadsheet. She read it twice, then said very softly, "Mom told me you never helped her." Rebecca had been lending her money, too, almost $5,000 over 3 years for prescriptions, car repairs, deposits, and short-term emergencies. Each time Mom told her she hated asking because I was not in a position to help. To me, she said she could not burden Rebecca because Rebecca had children. We sat shoulder to shoulder comparing transfers. The money hurt, but the design hurt more. Mom had made each of us feel privately chosen. "You're the only one I can count on. Don't tell your sister. She has enough." Problems. We had been living in different versions of the same family because we had never compared notes. Rebecca began remembering conversations she had never connected before. Mom had once called her after I declined an extra grocery transfer and said, "Your sister is going through one of her detached phases again." Another time she told me Rebecca had refused to help with medication because children make people selfish. Neither statement was true. Mom did not need large lies. She only needed enough distortion to stop us from asking each other direct questions. My sister looked furious, but beneath the anger was hurt. "I thought you didn't care," she said. "Not all the time, but sometimes I thought you chose work because you didn't want to deal with us." I told her I had spent years thinking she was the favored daughter because Mom seemed less demanding with her. Rebecca laughed through tears. Apparently, we were both jealous of jobs we did not want. That was the first honest conversation we had had about our mother in years. Rebecca wanted to confront her that night. I wasn't ready. I needed to know whether Mom was ashamed and desperate, or whether desperation had become a tool because it worked. The next day, I opened the Bellwether resident portal. As guarantor, I had access to the lease documents. 18 months earlier, Mom had transferred from the unit I remembered into a premium end-unit townhouse with a sunroom, attached garage, upgraded kitchen, and paid storage. Most of the market increase, I had been covering was the upgrade. I called the leasing office under the honest pretext of reviewing my obligations. The manager cheerfully mentioned how much my mother loved painting in the sunroom. I did not know my mother painted. The manager also mentioned the transfer had happened after Mom requested more room for family visits. I almost asked which family. I had slept on an air mattress the last time I stayed after a late holiday because Mom said the guest room was packed with storage. The realization was absurdly specific and therefore devastating. I had helped pay for a guest room I had not been allowed to use because it had become part of the story that justified the upgrade. That afternoon, I drove past Bellwether. Through the window, I saw a new sectional and floor lamp. In the driveway sat a crossover SUV with temporary tags. 6 days earlier, I had paid her insurance because she said her old car was becoming unsafe and she could not handle another expense. I finally understood that I had not been keeping her from falling. I had been subsidizing the height from which she preferred to stand. The next week, Mom asked me to help clear boxes from the guest room so she could turn it into a painting studio. While we moved holiday decorations, one carton split open. Old letters slid across the floor. An envelope near my shoe was addressed to my mother in my grandmother Ruth's handwriting. Inside was a list: shoes, dentist, choir dress, each followed by a dollar amount and a repayment plan in chores. Mom snatched it from me so quickly that for 1 second she looked 15 instead of 64. "Grandma made you pay her back for clothes?" I asked. Mom shoved the letters into the box. She taught responsibility. When I said children do not owe their parents for shoes, her eyes flashed. "I paid her back before I got married," she said, and there was pride in it. I felt compassion so fast it frightened me. My mother had grown up in a house where care came itemized. But then she said, "Some families understand what children owe," and the compassion stopped short of becoming permission. That day, I understood something important. Finding the origin of a wound does not make you responsible for receiving it. Mom had learned that love was safer when somebody owed somebody. I could not argue her out of that belief. I could only stop financing it. I also understood why sympathy had trapped me for so long. Every time Mom crossed a line, I could trace the behavior backward to something painful. Her childhood, the divorce, fear of aging, fear of being alone. There was always an explanation, and I had mistaken explanation for obligation. I thought being compassionate meant volunteering to absorb the consequences. But compassion without limits had not made either of us healthier. It had allowed Mom to avoid reality and allowed me to avoid the terror of disappointing her. We were both getting something from the arrangement. She got money and proof of loyalty. I got temporary relief from the fear that she would reject me. That was the part of the truth I least wanted to admit. At work, I told my supervisor, Jocelyn Park, the situation under the transparent fiction that it was about someone I knew. She asked whether I wanted my mother homeless or hungry. I said no. Then she asked whether I wanted to keep paying for the lifestyle Mom had chosen. I said no again. "Separate those two things," Jocelyn said. So I built support without cash. 2 smaller apartments, a nonprofit financial counselor, transportation options, and a written offer to help Mom move, sort paperwork, shop, and make calls. I spent hours checking actual prices because I wanted my offer to be real, not punitive. The smaller apartments were clean, safe, and near grocery stores. One even had a community garden. The counselor charged on a sliding scale. I wrote down what I was willing to do, and just as importantly, what I was not willing to do. Seeing both lists on paper made me realize how rarely I had defined help for myself. Until then, help meant whatever the other person requested. Before giving it to her, I called Dad and asked directly about the divorce. He went quiet, then told me the truth. When my parents sold the house, Mom received $205,000 in equity and her car was paid off. She had specifically wanted liquid cash so she would not have to depend on anyone. I sat on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear. Dad asked whether she had been asking me for money. "Enough that I should have asked this years ago," I said. He wanted details, but I only told him I was stopping. His answer was simple. "Are you in trouble?" It nearly broke me because nobody had asked before. After we hung up, I stayed on the floor until the kitchen light changed. I kept thinking about how carefully I had protected Dad from the secret because Mom called that protection loyalty. In reality, secrecy had protected the arrangement, not the people in it. Dad had been allowed to believe his settlement had done what he intended. Rebecca had been allowed to believe I was absent. I had been allowed to believe I was the only barrier between Mom and disaster. We had all been assigned a role and denied the information that might have let us refuse it. Lunch with Mom began pleasantly. Christmas music played in the kitchen, and the new sunroom was full of expensive art supplies. After we ate, I set a folder on the table and said, "Starting January 1st, I'm not paying your rent, groceries, car insurance, or emergencies anymore." I explained what I was offering instead. Help moving, budgeting, appointments, groceries during a transition, and the first counseling session already paid. "You still get me," I said. "You just don't get my bank account." She stared at me, then asked, "Who have you been talking to?" I told her it was my decision. Her next move was not fear about rent. It was a list of what raising me had cost: braces, asthma nights, school clothes, sacrifices. I heard my grandmother's old letters behind every word. "I'm grateful you raised me," I said, "but I'm not paying you back for being my mother." Her face hardened. What am I supposed to tell people? That question settled something in me. Not how will I live? What will I eat? What am I supposed to tell people? I pushed the folder toward her. "Tell them I offered to help you make a plan." By the time I reached my car, Aunt Valerie had called twice. Before dinner, 2 cousins had sent messages about loyalty. Mom's story was already traveling faster than mine. I did not defend myself. The family messages arrived in predictable language. Nobody asked what had happened. They asked why I was doing this at Christmas, why I was being so harsh, whether one more month could really hurt me. One cousin reminded me that Mom had driven me to college orientation. Another wrote that parents only get older once. I noticed that every argument focused on my duty and none on the facts. Dad handled the family pressure differently. He did not argue in the group chat or tell anyone the settlement amount. He simply called me every other evening and asked ordinary questions: whether I had eaten, whether the Subaru started, whether Tessa had found anything new. Those conversations were almost painfully mundane. I began to understand that care did not always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it was a person refusing to turn your crisis into a stage. For the first time, I did not write a defense. I did not attach screenshots. I did not expose Mom. I answered only Rebecca and Dad. Silence felt dangerous, but it also kept me from turning the family into a courtroom where I needed strangers to certify my pain before I could act. Rebecca did. She also checked her own transfers again and found an $800 insurance deductible. Mom had requested the same week I had sent $1,200. "I'm done too," she told me. For years we had been useful as long as we stayed in separate rooms. Now the rooms had a door between them. 3 days before Christmas, my realtor Tessa Monroe showed me a small brick bungalow in Lakeside. It had crooked floors, badly painted blue cabinets, a screened porch, and a huge pecan tree. Inside a hall closet, a previous family had marked children's heights in pencil. I loved it before I had permission to. The price was possible, but only if my money finally stayed mine. Tessa thou. GHT the seller might accept a longer closing. I stood on the porch and imagined coffee after a night shift, my sister's kids in the yard, and nobody calling the space selfish. "Write the offer," I said. Later at work, I opened my bank app. The recurring bellwether payment was scheduled for January 3rd. My body reacted as if I were doing something dangerous. Cold hands, tight chest, every old memory of silence after I said no. Then a 911 call came in, and for 11 minutes I talked a stranger through CPR until paramedics arrived. When the line disconnected, my hands were steady. I reopened the app and pressed cancel. A small confirmation appeared. No thunder, no catastrophe. I went back to work. I checked the cancellation twice before leaving work. Then I sat in my car at dawn and waited for guilt to tell me I had made a mistake. It came immediately. I pictured Mom opening her bank account in January and seeing the missing payment. I pictured eviction notices, tears, Valerie calling everyone. My mind supplied consequences faster than facts. Then another thought arrived. If my mother truly could not afford housing, the folder on her table contained choices. I had offered labor, time, transportation, planning, and food. The only thing I had withdrawn was unrestricted money. If the relationship collapsed because that one resource disappeared, then the relationship needed to be examined anyway. Christmas Eve was at Rebecca's house in Chesterfield, 22 people if you counted children. Dad carved ham, Aunt Valerie criticized the oven temperature, and Mom arrived 40 minutes late wearing a cream coat, new boots, and the gold watch from Santa Fe. I had promised myself I would not start anything. For the first hour, I succeeded. Then my cousin Megan asked about my house search. I admitted I had made an offer on a little place in Lakeside. Dad smiled. Rebecca squeezed my knee under the table. For a few seconds, the attention in the room was warm and uncomplicated. Mom took a sip of wine. "Of course it needs work," she said. "Erin has always liked projects more than people." Rebecca warned her, but Mom kept going, talking loudly about children who mistake independence for forgetting who raised them. Finally, she looked at me. "A house. You can barely manage yourself. How does it feel to choose a mortgage over your own mother?" I folded my napkin once. "It feels a lot cheaper than paying for your townhouse." Dad's fork struck his plate. "What townhouse?" I had imagined giving speeches in a moment like that. Real life was smaller. Dad stood and asked how long I had been paying. Mom told him to sit down. I said, "Almost 7 years." Rebecca added, "She's been asking me for money too." Mom called it occasional family help. I gave facts instead of the whole spreadsheet. Rent, groceries, insurance, emergencies, bellwether, more than $87,000. Her eyes flashed. You calculated it. Dad gripped the chair. Diane, you had $205,000 from the house, plus the Honda paid off. That was the settlement. The room went still. Mom accused him of breaking a promise never to discuss the divorce. Dad answered, I promised not to use it against you. I did not promise to watch you tell our daughters you had nothing. Rebecca asked where the money went. Mom said life was expensive, rebuilding was expensive, and nobody understood what it was like to lose a marriage at her age. When Dad said she had told me he left her with nothing, she replied, I felt like I had nothing. That sentence explained more than a denial could have. My mother could have money and feel abandoned, help and feel neglected, a premium townhouse and feel deprived. There was no amount I could transfer that would fix that scale. Then she turned on me. She said I had planned the humiliation, that I valued strangers at work more than family, that she had given me everything. I told her I knew Grandma had itemized what she owed as a child. Her face went white. You went through my things. The box broke open. I saw one letter. I'm sorry she taught you love that way. My voice shook, but I kept going. You can be hurt and still hurt people. I'm not continuing it. Mom's tears came then. I believe they were real. Real pain can still be used as a weapon. If you walk out of this house believing that, she said, don't call me your mother again. If you choose money over family, live without family. The old fear hit immediately. Part of me wanted to apologize, restart the payments, and buy my way back into the room. Then I looked around and saw Rebecca crying, Dad devastated, Marcus standing quietly near the doorway, and my niece listening from the hall. My mother did not own the word family. I stood. I'm not choosing money over family. I'm choosing not to pay an entrance fee. The counselor appointment is still paid. I'll help you move. I won't transfer cash. If you leave, we're done. Then I'll respect your decide. Sion. I put on my coat and left. I made it halfway down Rebecca's driveway before I folded onto the cold brick edge of the walk and cried so hard I could not find my keys. Dad came out and sat beside me without a coat. I thought giving her enough would make the fear quiet, he said. I think I spent most of our marriage paying for peace. Maybe he and I had been doing the same thing in different currencies. Rebecca came out with my purse and a plate wrapped in foil. Mom had already left with Valerie. You're not driving home hungry, my sister said, and sat beside us. For a few minutes, we were 3 adults on a freezing step while Christmas continued inside. Later, I drove to the bungalow in Lakeside and parked across the street. I imagined Dad fixing the porch, Rebecca's children in the yard, friends drinking coffee after night shift, people who did not need me damaged in order to feel loved. Mom left a voicemail. It moved from fury to grief to a tender memory of sewing my school costume when I was 8. I almost broke. Then she ended by telling me that if I cared at all, I would call Bellwether and fix this. The bill was still beneath the memory. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. On Christmas morning, Mom sent 31 messages. One claimed chest pain. I nearly called 911 until Rebecca showed me a church photo posted 15 minutes later with Mom smiling beside Valerie. My body still treated every signal from her as an emergency. January 3rd came. No payment left my account. At 9:12 a.m., Bellwether emailed me a receipt, rent paid in full from my mother's account. The same thing happened in February. The woman who supposedly could not survive without my money had found the money when mine stopped arriving. 2 weeks later, she came to the public lobby of my workplace and told reception there was an urgent family matter. When I went downstairs, she asked for help with her new car payment. "You have money now," she said. "That doesn't make it yours." She accused me of embarrassing her in public. I said, "I'm not the one who came to my workplace." Then I returned upstairs. That night, I sent one message. Because she had used my job to force contact, I needed 90 days with no calls, visits, or messages. Genuine medical emergencies could go through Rebecca or Dad. Then I blocked her number. No contact did not feel victorious. It felt like withdrawal. I missed the mother who made cinnamon toast when I was sick, taught me to drive without yelling, and slept on my couch after my first serious breakup. She was not a cartoon villain. She had loved me and used me. Both were true, and that was harder than hate. For the first 2 weeks, I kept reaching for my phone to check whether she had found another route around the block. I dreamed that I had missed an emergency and woke with my heart racing. At the grocery store, I almost bought her favorite tea out of habit. I stood in the aisle holding the box and realized my body had memorized service before my mind ever chose it. Rebecca and I developed an agreement during those months. We would not use each other as messengers. If Mom complained about me, Rebecca could listen or end the conversation, but she would not deliver the complaint. If Mom asked about my finances or house, Rebecca would say, "Ask Erin when she is ready." That small rule changed our sisterhood. We stopped being extensions of Mom's communication system and became two adults with a relationship of our own. Therapy helped me see how far the same fear had spread. I covered shifts nobody asked me to cover, apologized automatically, lent help before people requested it, and confused usefulness with belonging. When someone was disappointed in me, my first instinct was to fix the feeling before they could leave. Dr. Ward asked me once what I believed would happen if someone I loved thought I was selfish. I said they would leave. She asked whether anyone worth keeping should require me to harm myself to prevent that. I had no answer. For several sessions, that question irritated me more than it helped. Eventually, I began practicing small refusals where nothing important was at stake. I declined an overtime shift without inventing an excuse. I told a friend I could not drive her to the airport at 4 in the morning, but could help pay for parking if she needed it. I sent food back at a restaurant when the order was wrong. Each time, I waited for punishment. Most of the time, none came. My nervous system had been predicting a family response from people who were not my family. Meanwhile, the house offer was accepted. For the first time in years, my savings moved in one direction, up. Dad helped with the inspection, Rebecca stalked the listing as if it were a sports score, and Jocelyn gave me 2 ugly porch chairs from her garage. Mom respected the block only technically. Letters arrived through relatives until Rebecca told everyone to stop forwarding them. Near the end of tea, 90 days, Mom mailed one of Grandma Ruth's old notes to Rebecca's house. At the bottom, in Mom's teenage handwriting, was a sentence, "I will never owe anybody when I grow up." I cried because I finally saw the shape of her fear. She had tried to escape owing people by becoming the person everyone else owed. I mailed the letter back with one line. I'm sorry she taught you love this way. I won't continue it with you, and I won't continue it in myself. When the 90 days ended, I did not unblock Mom. The quiet had shown me what my nervous system felt like without constant crisis. I slept better. I took full weekends off. I bought a lamp simply because I liked it. A life returns in small things. I closed on the house in March. The attorney slid 4 cheap keys across the table, and I cried while signing the final page. Tessa said, "You earned the porch." I almost agreed, then stopped. "I chose it," I said. I had spent enough time believing every good thing had to be earned through pain. The first night I slept there, almost nothing was unpacked. My mattress was on the floor, the refrigerator contained mustard and a carton of eggs, and rain tapped against the porch screen. I woke at 3:40 a.m. certain I had forgotten to pay something for Mom. For several seconds I was already reaching for my phone. Then I remembered there was nothing to fix. I lay back and listened to the rain until my heartbeat slowed. The house was quiet, and for once quiet did not mean someone was preparing to punish me. The next morning, Dad arrived with tools, Rebecca with paint, Marcus with a used dining table, and Jocelyn with the ugly chairs. Rebecca's kids claimed bedrooms they did not live in. We painted, repaired screens, ate sandwiches off a folding table, and made noise without making demands. Dad spent 3 hours repairing a loose porch rail. At one point, I tried to hand him money for materials. He looked offended. "I'm your father," he said. The sentence made me freeze because Mom had used almost the same words for years. Dad saw my face and added, "Which means I get to offer. It doesn't mean you owe me." Then he went back to measuring the rail. I went inside and cried over a box of cabinet hinges. That was how healing worked that spring. Not in grand revelations, but in hearing familiar words followed by a different ending. That house taught me what chosen family actually meant. Dad sometimes sat on the porch while I slept after night shift. My coworkers came for pancakes at 7 in the morning. My neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, collected pecans from my tree and repaid me only because she wanted to, with tamales, not obligation. Nobody removed affection when I said no. Mom moved out of Bellwether in May, downsized to a 1-bedroom near Aunt Valerie, sold the SUV, and attended one financial counseling session. I heard it all secondhand. The world did not end. For years I had believed she would collapse if I stopped carrying her. When I put her down, she stood. 6 months after closing, Mom emailed me. It was short. She said she was trying to understand what had happened, admitted she had handled things badly, and added one sentence I had never received from her before: "I am not asking for money." She asked whether we could meet someday. It was not an apology. "I know you think I lied was not the same as I lied." I waited a week, then answered. I did not hate her, but any future contact required no money requests, no recruiting relatives, and honesty even when it made her look bad. We could start with coffee. I showed the email to Dr. Ward. She asked what I wanted, not what a good daughter was supposed to want. I realized I wanted 2 contradictory things: to hear my mother take responsibility and to stop needing her to say the perfect words before I could move forward. So I decided contact would be based on behavior, not on whether she produced the apology I had rehearsed in my head. We met on a Sunday. Mom looked less staged than usual: jeans, navy sweater, old silver earrings. For a while, we talked about weather and grandchildren. Then she admitted she had lied about Santa Fe because she knew I would ask questions. When I mentioned the water heater, she looked down and said the $900 had actually gone toward the SUV. "Why not tell me?" I asked. "Because you would have said no." "Yes." She nodded. "I know." Hearing the truth hurt almost as much as the lie, but this time she did not replace it with an excuse. I asked whether she understood why I did not trust her. She said yes. I asked about the settlement, too. Mom said some of it had gone into conservative investments after the divorce, some into living expenses, some into helping Aunt Valerie during a difficult year, and more than she wanted to admit into keeping up a life that made her feel not left behind. I could not verify every number, and I no longer needed to. The question was not whether every dollar could be reconstructed. The question was whether she would ever again make me responsible for whatever was missing. She looked at her hands and said, "When you sent money, I felt safe." I told her, "When I sent money, I felt afraid." She looked up. That was perhaps the first time she understood that the same transfer had meant opposite things to us. Then she told me Grandma, Ruth, used to say needing people was dangerous because they could collect. "I think I decided if people owed me, they couldn't leave," Mom said. "It didn't work." She gave a sad little laugh. "No." We did not reconcile in a single cup of coffee. We agreed to go slowly. No money, no family pressure, no fake emergencies. If those rules were broken, I would step away again. For the first time, Mom did not argue with the consequence. Before leaving, Mom asked whether she could see the house. I said not yet. Her disappointment was immediate. I saw it in the way her mouth tightened. Then she nodded and said, "All right." That simple acceptance mattered more than if she had said all the correct therapeutic words. For once, my no did not become the opening argument of a negotiation. Our relationship since then has been limited and imperfect. She does not have a key to my house. We meet for coffee once or twice a month. When she slips into old habits, I end the conversation instead of explaining myself into exhaustion. She has never asked me for another dollar. Last Christmas, 1 year after the dinner that cracked everything open, I hosted at my house. The dining table was too small, so Marcus added a folding table. Dad carved ham. Rebecca brought dessert. Jocelyn came because her daughter was away. Mrs. Ramirez arrived with tamales despite my warning that we had too much food. It was the family I was born into mixed with the family that had chosen me back. Mom was invited. At 3, the doorbell rang. She stood on the porch holding sweet potatoes. No dramatic entrance, no announcement. "I brought a dish," she said. I debated the invitation for days. Rebecca told me I did not owe Mom a holiday. Dad said the same. I invited her because I wanted to test the new relationship in my space under conditions I controlled, not because guilt demanded it. I also gave myself permission to ask her to leave if she crossed the line. That private permission made the invitation feel like a choice instead of a surrender. I stepped aside. "Come in." Dinner was awkward for 10 minutes. Then Owen spilled water, Marcus burned the rolls, Dad argued with Tessa about a porch column, and ordinary life rescued us. I looked around the table and saw something I had once tried to purchase. People staying because they wanted to. After everyone left, I found a folded note beneath Mom's casserole dish. My stomach tightened from old reflex. It said, Thank you for inviting me. I know I did not make it easy to do that. No request, no reminder of what she had sacrificed, no bill. I cried at the kitchen table, not because 7 years had disappeared, but because for once my mother had given me something without attaching a price. The next morning, I sat on the screened porch with coffee. My mortgage payment was scheduled for the 1st. For years, recurring payments had meant fear, guilt, and pieces of my future leaving before I could object. This payment was different. It was not buying love. It was building a life. I used to think boundaries were punishments because in my family distance was used that way. Now I think a boundary is a door you are responsible for opening and closing. You can love someone on the other side. You can understand how they became who they are. You can forgive what you are ready to forgive and still refuse unlimited access to your money, time, home, or peace. I spent almost 7 years paying to keep my mother from leaving me. When I finally stopped, she did leave for a while, and I survived. More importantly, I saw who stayed without being paid. My sister, my father, my friends, the people who arrived with paint rollers, tools, pancakes, ugly chairs, and no invoice. Eventually, even my mother learned that if she wanted to approach my door, she could not demand the key. If you know someone who has confused love with obligation for so long that saying no feels like betrayal, send them this story. Tell me in the comments what boundary helped you find your way back to yourself. Subscribe for more stories about families, truth, and second chances, and I'll meet you in the next episode.